Polis, politics, city, and citizenship were in ancient times about finding new ways of living together. How to do so responsibly was the question. It is still a formidable challenge today. Nearly 30 years into our democracy, South Africa is still struggling with this ancient question: how to live together responsibly. Plato understood politics more broadly than we generally do today. He saw it as the art of caring for souls. Art, caring, soul are not necessarily words that we would associate with politics today. We would rather think along the lines of power, used for good or bad, systems that work or don't, management, done better or badly, bureaucracy, generally frustrating, often counterproductive, getting in the way of getting the job done rather than getting the job done, corruption, infuriating to individuals and depleting the country of its resources. We could be cynical about politics, like Ambrose Bierce. Of course, in a democracy, institutions, rules, regulations, and laws are necessary for living a good common life, living together responsibly. But institutions, rules, regulations, and laws should address the needs of citizens, says philosopher Hannah Arendt. They should not become tyrannical monsters with a life of their own that escalate and spin out of control. Hannah Arendt points out that the intricate economic, social, and cultural web serves as the political milieu that gives rise to and shapes citizens' experiences and identity. Politics as art. Art is about more than just practicing a skill with a specific aim. It is about creativity, beauty, imagination. It has emotional power. Political institutions are the ones who should perform this art, not with the aim to only ensure survival for people, but also the flourishing of citizens. In order for people to flourish, says practical theologian Brian Lamott, they should have access to quality education, access to the arts, leisure, as well as resources and opportunities to find and live out meaningful and purposeful lives. Negatively stated, he says, the art of politics should not involve deprivation, exploitation, or mistreatment of souls. What is required for the well-being and flourishing of citizens is that people are to be recognized and treated as persons. If people's humanity is duly recognized, they will be able to participate freely in their own and others' survival and flourishing. This is not possible in a totalitarian milieu, in situations where racism, sexism, and other forms of oppression and marginalization exist. Caring for souls therefore goes beyond the provision for people's material needs and survival of their bodies. It includes their personal, social, and spiritual well-being and flourishing. Caring for souls has always been the pastoral task. Point of departure of pastoral theology is the understanding of human beings as imago Dei, namely that all human beings carry the imprint of God, and thus we are all obligated to recognize and embody this when we encounter the other. If we should still today see care as foundational to politics, a Christian anthropology can serve as a hermeneutical lens for critiquing political and economic realities. This would be critically addressing questions of power, justice, and the common good. Secondly, to help create a political vision. The art in countries such as South Africa requires different skills than in Plato's day. What would it take to facilitate a tolerable life and well-being for all? The paper explores how pastoral care, that ancient art of caring for souls, could contribute to a good life for all in a world where anxiety has become the great equalizer, where not only poverty but also excess presents a real danger to psychological, physical, and spiritual well-being. According to Leonard Boff, care accompanies the human being while it makes its pilgrimage in time. Care focuses on human suffering and need, both of which are connected to political realities. Without care, human beings cannot survive, let alone flourish. For Milton Meyerhoff, caring is about helping the other person to grow. His focus is on the individual. In order to do this effectively, the experiences and needs of the person should be assessed accurately. Joan Tronto sees caring more broadly as an activity that aims to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. And the world then includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment. Even broader still is the idea of Daniel Engster, for whom care is everything we do to help individuals meet their biological needs and develop or maintain their basic capabilities, avoid or alleviate unnecessary or unwanted pain and suffering, so that they can survive and develop and function in society. Lamotte, from a practical, theological, and pastoral perspective, sees care as everything we do to help individuals, families, communities, society to meet vital biological, psychosocial, and existentially spiritual needs, develop or maintain that which makes human flourishing possible, facilitate equal participation in politics, and maintain a habitable environment for all. An inhabitable environment of abject poverty, basic needs are not met. Flourishing and equal participation in politics are not possible. Abject poverty is becoming increasingly visible all over the world, not only in developing countries. Homeless and destitute people can be seen everywhere, especially in the big cities of the world. A narrow definition of poverty focuses on a lack of food, clothing, and shelter. From a human development perspective, Kofi Efa prefers a broader definition. Poverty is also about poor health, a lack of education, political freedom, and human rights. It is about vulnerability, powerlessness, voicelessness, exposure to risk. Poverty is not only about not having enough to survive, it is about the inability to live a tolerable life, a life of dignity. This presents a larger framework for the idea of well-being and flourishing. As poverty and vulnerability are not limited to a lack of material resources, so well-being and health are not necessarily present where there is an abundance of resources. The great equalizer is a sense of anxiety and vulnerability, which practical theologian Kirk Bingaman calls a new anxiety that is penetrating the world of those who previously didn't have to worry about poverty, war, crime, and exploitation. This is illustrated by Marita van der Vyver, a South African author who lives in France, in Provence, in a rural area. She writes about her life there for a South African audience. She says, You in South Africa are afraid to be in a lonely, isolated place, somewhere on a lonely road. You are afraid that you might be mugged or murdered or robbed. Here in France, we are afraid of crowds. Any moment, a vehicle comes smashing into the crowd and kill people, or a bomb can explode. You in South Africa are irritated by your load shedding, but at least you know 2 o'clock this afternoon till about 10 past 4, and then it's over. We in rural France have load shedding power failures all the time, but we don't know when it's coming, and we don't know how long it is going to be. Sometimes hours, sometimes days. So it's a different kind of anxiety and frustration, but anxiety and frustration all the same. According to sociologist Frank Furedi, anxiety is exacerbated by the media. They don't only report, but also dramatize current events. He calls them fear entrepreneurs, who turn anxieties into tangible fears. Psychologists Stardwick and Charney explain that fear is an adaptive response of the limbic system of the brain. Cues from the context trigger fear, and these cues in themselves become fear-conditioned stimuli because they're associated with danger. Every time you're confronted with these or similar stimuli, it makes you feel anxious. A context full of stimuli that engender anxiety is obviously not good for people's psychological, physical, spiritual health and well-being. Anthropologist Marc Auger explains that the excess of information about current affairs driven by technology makes the process of meaning-making and finding purpose in life difficult. He calls it a wasteland of meaning, which causes and exacerbates anxiety. The question is whether people are defined by their vulnerability or by their capacity to be resilient. And this is not a simple either-or choice. It's about remaining hopeful and being resilient even in the face of anxiety and vulnerability. The challenge is to find authentic hope and meaning in an age of anxiety. For this, theology can serve as a valuable resource. Stephen Frosch, in his book, After Words, argues that since modernism with its science and technology has not been the answer, we should be much more humble and realistic about human knowledge and capabilities. We should challenge social discourse and meta-narratives that benefit only the few. Suppressed narratives and silenced voices should be heard. Difference should be celebrated rather than feared, says Robert Keegan in his book, In Over Our Heads, The Mental Demands of Modern Life. Sounds good, but it's not always that easy. Benjamin points out that people are often tempted to hold on to old fixed beliefs because that gives them a sense of stability and security. We know who we are, what we are worth, and how things work in our little world. But these fixed beliefs are not conducive to holistic growth. It's unhealthy on a spiritual, psychological, and physical level. More effort is needed in the process of meaning making. The problem is not that meaning has disappeared from our lives. The problem is that the meaning making process cannot keep up with the excess of information and stimuli, as well as the speed of change. This experience makes us aware of how fleeting life is, which further exacerbates anxiety. Excess promises much, but it does not deliver on quality of life. It does not relieve anxiety. From a practical theological perspective, Bingaman points out that spiritual and theological beliefs and values should be included in the effort to tend to people's health and well-being. Even if formal religion does not always help, theologians and pastoral theologians can be creative when it comes to meaning-making in this day and age. We, along with mental health and health practitioners, can guide the people of our era to rediscover meaning and purpose. The culture of poverty has two faces. The one is the poverty of material deprivation, the other is the poverty of empty excess. People's anxiety, sense of meaninglessness and hopelessness, often attributed to external factors, powers over which they have no control. They then look to external agents such as government and politics to remedy the situation, which only means that they surrender their agency to the other, to these institutions. And the feeling of powerlessness and being trapped is not good for people's health and well-being. The poverty of material deprivation has specific challenges. Aside from the obvious problem of not having enough to live a tolerable life, a dignified life, to have enough to eat, it also has psychological and social effects. When people are ascribed negative social roles and labels, they develop a negative social identity, that of a non-person. And this also affects their personal psychological identity. In order for this to change, social transformation is necessary. Only if people are removed from the status of non-person can they become economically active and play a positive role as citizens in society. The poverty of excess, the other side of the coin, presents different challenges, often anxiety, stress, and the loss of meaning. This is also harmful to people's psychological, physical, and spiritual well-being. A study on cardiac patients by Gostoli et al. Found that high stress levels reduce the level of contentment and the ability to feel joy and hope for the future. Except for all the biological aspects, what makes the greatest difference to people's quality of life and well-being, according to this study, is a sense of autonomy, purpose in life, and self-acceptance. The question is then, how could we improve health and well-being in a sustainable way? Stress affects everything and is increasing in our world. Stress often manifests in symptoms that indicate a medical condition, but then no medical cause can be found. People suffer from chronic fatigue, which is then often attributed to a viral infection. And these problems continue in people's social life, at work, and in other areas of functioning, says practical theologian Donald Capps. Already in the 1800s, William James pointed out that people of the modern age are weakened by all this over-tension. Today, people's lives and well-being are often paralyzed by stress. The negative effect of stress can be overcome by resilient responses to challenges. Resilience is the ability to bounce back and find a way with the challenges of life, rather than become emotionally or spiritually paralyzed. Resilience factors identified by Sarvik and Charney include the ability to confront fears rather than be paralyzed by them or try to escape them, an optimistic and realistic outlook on life, social support, good role models, inner strength, an inner moral compass, spiritual and religious practices, as well as the search for meaning and finding opportunities in difficult circumstances, all contribute to strengthening people's ability to accept realities they cannot change and find a constructive way to live and deal with them. Coping strategies for dealing with distress effectively have been developed in the field of psychology. Joseph Ledoux focuses on the formation of new memories in the brain to counteract fear-conditioned stimuli. Martin Seligman focuses on dealing with negative thoughts by consciously choosing positive rather than negative explanations. Salvik and Chani want to understand the causes of anxiety. What the brain understands, it can interpret, evaluate, and reframe. From a holistic perspective, these psychological strategies can help. Good physical health and habits can help. Spirituality can help people to cope with distress. Some find inner peace and a sense of security in formal religion, others in private spiritual practices. And Graber describes religion as a path to God, the source of being, and spirituality as that essential human endowment which direct experiences of God can take place. The experience of connection to something greater than oneself can be a spiritual resource to foster a resilient response, says Frobel Walsh. Religion can influence the way in which people experience the challenges of life and look to the future. In the confusion of life in the contemporary era, spiritual resources can provide a coherent framework. The wounded soul can find meaning in living a life without pretense or armor, approaching all experiences with openness, courage, and compassion. Faith and faith practices such as prayer and ritual can contribute to feelings of gratitude, hope, and peace, which can have a positive effect on how people see themselves in relation to their world. That they can pray for help, courage, wisdom, strengthens them on a personal, spiritual, and psychological level. The belief that they are fully accepted by God and the faith community can provide a sense of freedom and safety. That is, if the faith community is able to provide that. Through rituals and ceremonies, a sense of connection with others can be established, and this helps to break them out of the isolation of pain and distress. Faith, intimacy, resilience are interwoven, says Froma Walsh. Faith and faith practices can therefore help people to respond with resilience to a world of deprivation for some, empty excess for others, and the rapid change and the anxiety that it generates, which affects all. However, Jane Adiyambo Chiroma points out that it is not enough for Christian believers who want to contribute to civil society and combat corruption to know biblical theology and ethics. They should understand the meaning of civil society and democracy and their rights and responsibilities as citizens. For her, democracy is not simply a Western import to Africa. The root of the word means something like people power. It's about how people interact to reach agreement on how to handle a particular issue. Or in the words of ancient democracy, how to live together responsibly. Predating democracy is the African idea of Ubuntu, which recognizes that a person's source of humanity comes from being in community. The consequence, if the individual has dignity, so does the community. This humanity in community makes for a sense of belonging, participation, and living in solidarity, all of which are conducive to health, physical, mental, and spiritual. Over against the narrow idea of democracy as associated with the political power of a majority group that has all the say, is the broader idea that democracy prioritizes open-mindedness, and fairness. It encourages moderation, cooperation, accommodation. This more egalitarian understanding of democracy, rooted in respect for all, says Chiroma, fits well with Christian theology, which holds that because all are created in the image of God, all are entitled to respect. In this style of democracy, power is distributed equally. All can participate in deliberation. All can have an equal chance to speak. In this way, all can work together for the common good and promote welfare and stability for all. Similarly, with citizenship, there is the narrower understanding of citizenship as a legal matter of identity documents and passports, accompanied by rights. Here you may enter, restrictions. Here you may not enter. The broader understanding is that of citizenship as participatory, which involves rights and responsibilities. It's about identity, belonging, and how individuals play a role in building a democracy. Citizenship, therefore, is the way in which we live together and organize our lives despite our differences, says Chiroma, living together responsibly. Christian believers should be actively involved in the construction of well-being for all, to create a space where people with a negative social identity, poor, depleted, unwhole, unwell non-persons, can regain their identity and dignity as child of God and experience wholeness and well-being. Meaningful transformation and true healing can take place where people feel welcome in the presence of God. The miracle healing in the New Testament was not about a supernatural intervention of God, but rather about God's enduring presence giving meaning to the lives of people. Health, narrowly seen, is the ability of an organism to maintain itself. If it gets sick, medical science wants to cure disease. From a broader perspective, health can be seen as a condition of well-being, a life with personal and social meaning and wholeness. Jesus' healings were about giving new meaning to the suffering person's lives, says New Testament scholar John Pilch. This healing is empowering and transforming. It gives people hope and the motivation to survive in the best possible way. Jesus' engagement embodied God's presence, care, and grace, also in the lives of the non-persons in society. Christian believers who have committed their lives to following Jesus can and should become active agents in healing a world of stress and distress in a complicated society such as ours. We call ourselves a Christian country. We pride ourselves on our legacy of Ubuntu. Both frameworks, Christian faith and opposite Ubuntu, policy and politics, city and citizenship, cannot be about power over others and pursuing own interests at the cost of others. Both a Christian and an African vision for living together responsibly connect with the essence of how Plato understood politics, the art of caring for souls. Then transformation won't be this enormous effort that goes against the grain of our human self-interest. Then transformation would be about returning, converting to who we were in the first place, in Christ and in Africa. I thank you.